So, can you see something? Yes. So firstly, I want to tell you some story. It was about 2.5 years ago. It's not my story, it's sort of my parents. They went for a New Year Eve, but the problem is that in Poland, New Year Eve is a big celebration. People are walking on the karaoke, and some of them are spending a New Year Eve in the theater. However, because actually it's quite expensive to go there, so actors probably don't want to waste their job just for one evening. So because of that, this New Year Eve is repeating every day during whole January. And it's funny because, you know, it's midnight and everybody, hey, Happy New Year, and it's middle of January. And, you know, today, why I'm talking about this? Because today I want to do something very similar. I mean, I don't want you to say Happy New Year. Of course you can, but it's probably pointless. So, yeah, about 1 week ago, I was at React Native Europe conference. And I make a presentation, and it's actually the same presentation. So probably I want you to have a similar experience like my parents. I'm in the same presentation because I'm a bit lazy and I didn't change anything in this presentation, sorry. But yes, also I was making this presentation with my friend, with Satajit Sahu, who's there. So yes, I'm Michał Osadnik. So let's just move to this presentation. Sorry for this introduction. So once more, hello everyone, my name is Michał Osadnik. Me and Satya are working on React Navigation, and that's what we want to talk about today. So let's start with a very simple question. What actually is navigation? It might sound like a very simple thing, but this is really vital to understand our motivation regarding the ideas we're going to talk about. So firstly, I want to start with a question to you. You have few React Native developers here. Can you raise your hands? Cool, they are not so... Okay. React developers? Okay, it's better. You should try React Native. But yeah, I mean, you should try React Native at least to understand what I'm talking about. So most apps have pages. They are a bit different and calls for different requirements than on web. Most apps have pages and need a way to navigate between them. A navigation library can make it easier to organize those pages, link between them, pass data between them, and libraries such as React Navigation, which is the most popular currently navigation library in React Native, has to provide a single consistent API to implement various navigation patterns commonly seen in native apps. There are two important things navigation library does for us. Firstly, it makes our page transition follow native patterns, such as transition animations, gestures, etc. Let's call it low-level navigation. Secondly, it manages the navigation state in the app and handles navigation event. Let's call it high-level navigation because it composes low-level navigation patterns into a complete framework called navigation. For example, in React Navigation, the logic for state management lives in core in the router and the routers. The behavior, the low-level behavior, is implemented by primitives such as stack view, tab view, drawer view, etc. Then they are combined into navigators such as stack navigator, tab navigator, and drawer navigator. So what are the main motivations for so deep decoupling logic and behavior? We want to make all layers of React Navigation independent on each other and more modular. The library can share the same state management logic as long as it accepts a certain set of props. It makes it easy to wrap existing libraries, then to integrate with navigation library. We can also refactor and improve the core independently from integration to fix bugs and improve the API. So, for instance, if you want to write a custom drawer or custom tab router, it should be super easy. You can just do it and import React Navigation and everything should go fine. That's also how React Navigation thrives, by integrating libraries from the community and adapting them to React Navigation API. We can provide a consistent experience for managing navigation for the user without having to re-implement things if someone has already done it. This approach makes it easy to maintain as well, because none of maintainers need to have end-to-end knowledge regarding how React Navigation works internally. Following this, we have split React Navigation into multiple packages. The core API is implemented by React Navigation Core with packages such as Stack, Tabs, and Drawer integrate with it to provide a consistent API. Each of these libraries plans to address different navigation patterns, some with their own implementation, or some by just wrapping existing community libraries, while keeping the API consistent. Also, we have many supportive packages such as React Navigation Native for mobile integration or similar one for web. We think it's important because being the current leading solution in the community for navigation, we need to address a lot of use cases, and we don't want to be a monolithic library, which will be extremely hard to maintain. One of the things we talk about regarding motivations of decoupling is the ability to work on the core independently. The core is the part which provides a user-facing API. So let's focus on the API that React Navigation provides and talk about common pain points that people faced. React Navigation is super easy to get started with. We have extensive documentation and a ton of features. However, we found that the API is not very flexible. The design of React Navigation API is based on static configuration. The architecture has a lot of benefits, but it also poses some big limitation in the way React Navigation can be used. Let's take a look on the current API. The first step is to define our navigators. It involves calling the create navigator function, such as create tab navigator or create stack navigator, and passing the root configuration and options for the navigator. The codes need to be defined at the top level and runs even before our app renders. This means we cannot configure our navigator based on props, state, context. For example, it's not possible to set a different initial road conditionally. It's also not possible to add and remove roads dynamically based on some data. It could be especially useful with tabs, where we may want to render screen based on some data from the server. You know, these tabs at the bottom of the screen. Here's another issue. Each screen in React Navigation can provide some options to the navigator, such as screen title, header style, etc. Currently, configuring screen options is done with static property on the component called navigation options. Since it's a static property, we don't have access to the component's props or state. That's the pain. So think like updating some state or component or calling a method was not possible. There's a workaround using some params, but yeah, they are not pretty. So we made our navigation setup not very dynamic. We couldn't use much of React patterns. Actually, recently we have asked you folks, React Native community people, about problem you had with React Navigation, and most of you wanted a more dynamic API. So today, not today, a week ago, but today, we're announcing a new component-based API for React Navigation. We took a static configuration API and made it more dynamic. We think it's so you ask and we deliver. So now the listeners, it's this moment on every conference talk, hope you hype. So we've rewritten React Navigation from scratch, keeping the same concept you're already familiar with, but with a more dynamic API. We think it's awesome and super excited to tell you about new possibilities it brings. So today, a week ago, we're announcing a React Navigation 5.0 alpha. Let's take a look. We still have the concept of navigators, just a bit differently. Now, we don't pass any configuration when we're creating a navigator. Instead, we render the navigation as a component, and we pass the configuration as props. To define our screens, we render them as children of the navigator. For each screen element, we need to pass at least a name and a component to render. Take a look. To specify screen-specific options for the navigator, we can pass them in the option props to the screen. The important difference is that all of this configuration is happening inside a render method. So it's no longer static, and we can dynamically change the configuration. Let's take a look again how we would solve the issues with static configuration we talked about earlier. With the component-based API, we can now access props, state, or context while configuring our navigator. So it will be possible to conditionally set options such as initial route name. Similarly, we can define screen dynamically based on some data. So we can fetch a list of tabs and render them easily. This also allows for some neat tricks. For example, we can conditionally define a bunch of screens. This makes flows such as user onboarding much simpler, since now we can remove screens entirely based on prop instead of having to reset stack after logging in. We have also a new API for configuring screen options dynamically. There is now a new set options method. It lets us easily set screen options based on some PropsStateContext without messing with params. Instead of static options, we can call it anytime to configure the screen. So notice how it became straightforward to add a back button in the header. Since we wrote the React Navigation library from scratch, we're able to take advantages of the new React API to make our code simpler. So React developers, do you know what's the most hyped feature announced last year? Let's say, oh, hooks, exactly. So yes, we decided to use hooks. We're building the library and hooks first approach. But yeah, not only because hooks are trendy. They are, of course, but we didn't write library because we found it trendy. But we have some motivation behind this. Firstly, we deeply care about making sure that React Navigation works well with type system. And you know, how many of you have experience with typing high-order components? Okay, never mind. But high-order components are very difficult to properly type check, while hooks are way more better in this case. Hooks also reduce the nesting and help us keep the React hierarchy clean without adding any unnecessary wrappers, just to pass some props. So for instance, instead of with React Navigation high-order component, we can use navigation hook to obtain the navigation object used for many things for the screen and in any component we want. We have a new use focus effect, hook to run effect when the screen is focused. This is similar to use effect from React Core. Use focus effect is especially useful for subscribing for some events or updates. So there's no longer a need for struggling with any wheel focus, wheel blur, and other lifecycle events delivered by React Navigation. So if we want to conditionally render something based on a focus on the screen, we just need to import use isFocus hook and use it in our components. So can it be simpler? We have written the library in Typescript, so types are no longer afterthought. We now get a first-class autocompletion and type checking. Here's a quick demo. Notice how we autocomplete params for the root. We also autocomplete methods on the navigation objects, such as navigate, push. When you navigate, you can autocomplete the available route names and params. Okay, take a look how easy it is. We have long recommended not to put navigation state inside Redux. However, many people are missing integration with Redux Dev Tools. Redux Dev Tools are really awesome, and so we have added experimental integration with Redux Dev Tools extension. Yeah, we don't using Redux, but we have integration with Redux Dev Tools. We can now see the navigation actions in DevTools along with the current navigation state, and it also supports time travel debugging. It also works with React Native Debugger, which uses this extension under the hood, and it's all automatic without any extra setup. All this sounds awesome, but we know that it can be a lot of work to migrate your whole code base to the new API, so we promise we will keep maintaining the old React Navigation versions and release bug fixes. However, it's not possible to provide full compatibility due to the different architecture of the library, but we are working on a small compatibility layer to handle some API differences, which will hopefully help with gradually migrating to new code. If you want to give a try, you can go to reactnavigation.com/next and follow the instruction. It's still alpha, so be careful while using it in production, unless you like living in the edge. I do. Your feedback is very important. Let us know if you encounter any bugs or have any suggestion, or I don't know. If you have any question, you can catch me after the talk. And thank you, and have a nice day.